Marcus Blackwood's heart pounded as he wrapped his coat around the half-frozen woman, the first person he'd touched since burying his wife and child 15 years ago. Her eyes opened, filled with unearned trust, jolting him back to the man he was before grief turned him into a recluse. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Under the frozen sky of Montana, Marcus Blackwood rode with a slow, steady rhythm, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The crunch of snow beneath his stallion's hooves was the only sound breaking the deafening silence of the mountain pass. He had been tracking a wolf pack for nearly 2 days, determined to protect what remained of his cattle herd before winter's grip tightened further. Marcus liked it this way, alone, silent, predictable. The vast whiteness stretching before him matched the emptiness he'd cultivated inside over 15 bitter years. His weathered face, framed by a salt and pepper beard, revealed little of the man he once was. Only his eyes, sharp blue like fractured ice, hinted at depths he'd rather forget. Then he heard it, so faint it might have been the wind whispering through pine needles, a sound like a breath that had forgotten how to exhale. He reined in his horse, head tilting, heart slowing. It came again, a whimper, weak and sharp like a thread about to snap. Marcus dismounted carefully, the leather of his saddle creaking in protest. Rifle slung across his back, he moved through the towering pines and snow-covered boulders until he reached a small clearing. And there, huddled against the trunk of a massive spruce, he saw her. She was half buried in snow, her body curled inward like a wounded animal. Her coat, too thin for these mountains, was torn at the shoulder. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her long chestnut hair matted with ice and what looked like blood. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic breaths. But she was alive. Marcus's eyes darted to the surrounding trees, scanning the ridge, the rocks. No footprints besides his own and what appeared to be her faltering trail. No sounds except the occasional crack of branches bearing too much snow. Christ, he muttered, hell happened to you? The girl stirred slightly, her head lolling forward. He could see her face now, young, maybe 20, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline. Her lips blue from cold. You hear me, girl? He asked, voice hoarse from disuse. No response. I'm not here to hurt you, he said softer, almost to himself, as he approached cautiously. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of amber in sunlight. Fear sparked in them briefly before exhaustion claimed her again. Marcus knelt beside her, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of a man who'd survived these mountains for decades. Hypothermia for certain, possibly frostbite on her fingers. The blood in her hair suggested a head wound. She wouldn't survive another hour out here. He hesitated, one hand hovering above her shoulder. Marcus Blackwood didn't involve himself in other people's problems. He hadn't invited anyone onto his land or into his life since the accident that took his family. People brought complications, and complications brought pain. But she groaned again, and that sound undid him. Damn it all, he whispered, shrugging off his heavy buffalo coat. I ain't that heartless yet. With one swift motion, he wrapped the coat around her trembling frame. It swallowed her whole, like a child playing dress-up. Her eyes fluttered open once more, unfocused but seeking his face. Easy now, he said. You're safe, at least for the moment. She blinked once. Then again, still no words, but her gloved hand weakly clutched at his sleeve. He poured water from his canteen onto a cloth and dabbed her cracked lips. You got a name? He asked gently. Nothing. Guess we'll find one for you then, he murmured. He stood, lifting her with effort, cradling her against his chest. Her weight was concerning too light, as if the mountains had already begun reclaiming her. For now, you're with me. And with that, Marcus Blackwood turned back toward home, carrying a half-frozen stranger and breaking the one rule that had kept him sane since burying his wife and daughter: never care again. The journey back to his cabin took twice as long with the girl in his arms. By the time the outline of his homestead appeared through the curtain of falling snow, the day was fading fast, pulling the temperature down with it. His arms burned with effort, but he didn't stop. The cabin stood like a fortress against the white landscape, solid logs darkened by age, a stone chimney and a roof built to bear the weight of winter's worst. Smoke curled from the chimney where he'd banked the morning's fire before leaving. Marcus nudged the door open with his boot and carried the girl inside. The warmth hit him immediately, the scent of pine and wood smoke familiar and grounding. He laid her gently on the bearskin rug before the hearth, careful to keep her wrapped in his coat. He worked methodically, stoking the fire until it roared, heating water in the iron kettle, gathering clean cloths and bandages from the cabinet where they'd sat unused for years. His hands moved with a certainty his mind lacked, muscle memory from a time when he'd been responsible for more than just himself. Let's see what we're dealing with, he murmured, kneeling beside her. With careful fingers, he examined the wound on her head. A nasty gash above her temple, but not as deep as he'd feared. He cleaned it gently, applied a salve of herbs he'd gathered last summer, and wrapped a bandage around her head. Next came her hands, red and swollen from cold. He removed her gloves to find fingers white at the tip's early frostbite, but salvageable if treated quickly. He immersed her hands in lukewarm water, gradually adding warmer water as circulation returned. Her face contorted in pain as feeling came back, but she remained unconscious, which was probably a mercy. You're a fighter, he observed quietly. That's good. You'll need it up here. As he worked, he studied her more carefully. Her clothes were good quality but Cetaphil leather boots with impractical heels, a wool coat better suited to Boston than Montana territory. No wedding ring, no obvious identification, just a small gold locket around her neck that he left untouched. Whatever her story was, it wasn't his business. When he'd done all he could for her injuries, Marcus lifted her again and carried her to the single bed in the corner, his bed, the only one in the cabin. He laid her down, covering her with every blanket he owned, then retreated to the wood stove to make broth. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded thing, rattling the windows in their frames. The storm was worsening. They'd both be trapped here for at least a few days, maybe longer. Marcus stirred the pot slowly, his thoughts churning faster than the spoon in his hand. 15 years he'd lived alone, speaking more to his horses and the mountains than to any person. 15 years of carefully constructed solitude, of penance for failures he couldn't forgive himself for. And now this, a stranger in his bed, dependent on him for survival. What the hell am I doing? He whispered to the empty room. From the bed, the girl moaned softly. Marcus turned to see her stirring, eyes still closed but face twisted in what looked like a nightmare. Without thinking, he moved to her side, sitting carefully on the edge of the mattress. "You're all right," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Just rest now." Single quotes to his surprise, she seemed to hear him. Her features relaxed slightly, and she turned instinctively toward the sound of his voice. One hand emerged from beneath the blankets, reaching blindly, and before he could think better of it, Marcus took it in his own. Her fingers were small within his calloused palm, but they gripped with surprising strength, as if she were drowning and he was the only thing keeping her afloat. "I've got you," he promised, though he knew she couldn't hear. "I've got you." Outside, the blizzard raged on, burying the world in white silence. But inside the cabin, something long dormant in Marcus Blackwood's chest shifted painfully, like ice beginning to crack under pressure. He sat motionless beside the sleeping stranger, allowing her to hold onto his hand while the night deepened around them. And for the first time in 15 years, Marcus Blackwood was not alone. Dawn arrived as a faint gray suggestion beyond frost-covered windows. Marcus had spent the night in his chair by the fire, dozing fitfully, waking at each small sound from the bed. The storm had intensified, snow piling against the cabin walls like nature's attempt to bury what man had built. He rose stiffly, joints protesting the cold in the uncomfortable sleeping position. The fire had died to embers. He fed it methodically with seasoned pine, movements quiet and practiced. When warmth began to return to the room, he glanced toward the bed. The girl hadn't moved much, still bundled in layers of wool and fur, but her breathing had steadied overnight, the shallow gasps replaced by deeper, more rhythmic respirations. The feverish flush that had colored her cheeks for hours had receded, leaving her pale but no longer alarmingly so. Marcus approached, reluctance in every step. He placed a weathered hand against her forehead, cooler now, the fever breaking. Relief flickered across his features before he could suppress it. He was turning away when her eyes opened. Golden brown and disoriented, they tracked the unfamiliar ceiling before finding his face. Fear flashed immediate and visceral. She scrambled backward until she hit the wall. Blankets clutched to her chest like a shield. "Easy," Marcus said, voice rougher than intended. He stepped back, hands raised slightly. "You're safe." Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rustic furnishings, the bearskin rugs, the antlers mounted above the stone fireplace. Her gaze returned to him, wary but no longer panicked. "Where am I?" Her voice emerged cracked and thin, but the words were clear. "My cabin. Found you half frozen in the pass yesterday." He moved to the wood stove, giving her space. "Storm's got us trapped for now." She touched the bandage on her head, wincing. "I don't remember ... head wound. Memory might be foggy for a bit." He poured steaming broth into a tin cup. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly as if testing her own recollection. "Eleanor," she finally said. "Eleanor Chase." Marcus nodded once, offering no introduction in return. He approached with the broth, extending it at arm's length to maintain distance. "Drink, slowly." Eleanor accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. He turned away, busying himself with the fire. "Blackwood." "Marcus." She sipped the broth carefully, eyes never leaving his back. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the howl of wind and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. "Was tracking wolves. Heard something." He shrugged. "You were nearly buried in snow, and you brought me here." It wasn't a question, but her tone conveyed a mixture of gratitude and something else, perhaps surprise that a man like him would bother. Marcus grunted in acknowledgement, uncomfortable with her attention. He moved to the window, pushing aside the deerskin curtain. Nothing but white met his eyes. Snow still falling heavily. Storm's bad. Might be days before it lets up. Eleanor set the empty cup on the small table beside the bed. "I'm sorry to impose on you, Mr. Blackwood." The formality of her speech confirmed what her clothing had suggested. She wasn't from these parts. Her accent carried traces of Eastern refinement. "Boston, or perhaps New York. What were you doing up in the pass?" he asked, still looking out the window. When she didn't immediately answer, he turned. She was staring at her hands, now ungloved, and showing the reddened marks of recovering frostbite. "I was trying to reach Colville," she finally said. "The stagecoach stopped in Thornton, but I needed to continue." The driver refused, said a storm was coming, her mouth tight. "I hired a guide instead. He took my money and abandoned me when the snow started. Said I'd been a fool to come and he wasn't dying for my stubbornness. Marcus's jaw clenched. There were men in Thornton who'd take a woman's money knowing full well they were sending her to her death. The rage that flared in his chest took him by surprise. He'd thought himself beyond such reactions. That was 3 days ago, she continued quietly. I've been walking since. I thought I could follow the coach road, but the snow ... is a good quote. She shook her head. Everything looked the same. You're lucky to be alive. The words came out harsher than intended. She lifted her chin, a flash of steel beneath the vulnerability. Yes, I realize that, and I'm grateful for your help, truly. She attempted to rise, swayed alarmingly, and sank back onto the bed. As soon as I'm able, I'll continue to Colville. Marcus snorted. Not in this storm, you won't, and not for days after it passes. Mountains don't care about your plans, Miss Chase. Her cheeks flushed with either fever or indignation. I have urgent business. With who? Colville's barely a town. 12 buildings and a cemetery that's filling faster than they can dig graves. That's not your concern, she replied, her composure returning. But I assure you, it's important enough to risk the journey. Marcus turned away, irritated by her stubbornness and his own curiosity. Whatever brought an Eastern lady to the Montana territory in the dead of winter wasn't his business. He'd already done more than his share by saving her life. He grabbed his wool coat from its peg knot, the buffalo coat she still had wrapped around her, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Alarm tinged her voice. Livestock needs tending, storm or not. He pulled on gloves. Rest. There's more broth on the stove. Try to eat. Before she could respond, he stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. The cold hit him like a physical blow, the wind driving snow into his face with stinging force. He bent his head against it and trudged toward the barn where his horses and the few remaining cattle would be waiting. The physical labor of breaking ice from troughs and distributing hay gave his mind something to focus on besides the woman in his cabin. He moved from stall to stall, checking each animal with gruff care, speaking to them in low tones that he'd never used with human company. Gotta visit her old girl, he told his mare as he brushed her coat. City woman with more determination than sense. The horse nickered softly, pushing her nose against his shoulder. Don't get attached, he warned both the horse and himself. Be gone soon as the pass clears. By the time he finished the chores, his fingers were numb despite the gloves, and daylight was already beginning to fade. Winter days were criminally short up here. He stomped snow from his boots before re-entering the cabin, braced for whatever demands or questions the woman might have. Instead, he found her asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Her chestnut hair had been loosened from its pins and spilled across his pillow in waves. Someone else might have found the sight appealing. Marcus only noted with clinical detachment that her color was better. She'd live, which meant his conscience could rest easy. He moved silently to the fireplace, adding logs and stirring the coals back to life. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday. He reached for the pot of beans he'd left warming and spooned some into a bowl. You have a beautiful home. Her voice startled him. He turned to find her awake, watching him with eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. It's shelter, he corrected. Nothing more. Single quotes. Eleanor slowly sat up, wincing slightly. The craftsmanship tells a different story. Those support beams were hand-hewn with care. The mantel has carvings, flowers, and vine. That's not mere shelter, Mr. Blackwood. That's a home someone loved. Marcus stiffened. You talk too much. A small smile touched her lips. So I've been told. She gestured to the room. Did you build this place? Yes. He turned away, unwilling to discuss it further. Alone? The single word hung in the air between them. Marcus felt a muscle jump in his jaw. Eat something, he said instead of answering, pushing a bowl toward her. You need strength if you're so determined to reach Colville. Her smile faded, replaced by a solemnity that seemed too old for her young face. We all have ghosts, Mr. Blackwood. I didn't mean to disturb yours. Something about her words, the quiet understanding in them, unsettled him more than any prying question could have. He busied himself with his own meal, keeping his eyes on the fire rather than the woman who'd somehow glimpsed truths he never spoke aloud. Outside, the storm continued its assault, sealing them together in this unexpected truce. The wind moaned around the eaves like a living thing searching for entry, finding none in the solid walls Marcus had built to keep the world at bay, until now. Night descended fully, transforming the cabin windows into black mirrors that reflected the interior rather than revealing the world outside. The storm's voice had changed from a howl to a deep, persistent moan, punctuated by the occasional crack of branches surrendering to the weight of snow. Marcus sat in his chair by the fire, whittling a piece of pine without real purpose or design. The rhythmic scrape of knife against wood filled the silence between them. Eleanor had managed to eat half a bowl of beans before exhaustion reclaimed her, but she fought against sleep, watching him from beneath heavy lids. You should rest, he said without looking up. I've been unconscious most of the day. I'm not eager to surrender more time. She shifted against the pillows, wincing slightly. Besides, I have questions. Doesn't mean I have answers. A smile touched her lips briefly. Fair enough, but perhaps you'd indulge me anyway? The sound of another human voice is a comfort in a storm like this. Marcus glanced up, struck by the simple honesty in her statement. He'd grown so accustomed to silence that he'd forgotten how it might weigh on others. Ask, then, he conceded, returning to his whittling. Can't promise I'll answer. Eleanor considered him for a moment. How long have you lived here? 20 years. Alone for 15. The words came automatically, more than he'd intended to share. She nodded as if he'd confirmed something she'd already guessed. And before that, Marcus's knife stilled. Virginia, originally, came west after the war. Which side? She asked quietly. Gray. His voice hardened slightly, but I was no believer in their cause. Just a boy who didn't want to see his home burned. Elena's expression remained neutral. My father fought for the Union. He never spoke of it either, except once when he'd had too much brandy. He said both sides lost, just in different ways. Marcus grunted, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. His knife resumed its steady work, shaving thin curls of wood that fell to the floor like pale imitations of the snow outside. And what of you, Miss Chase? What urgent business brings an Eastern lady to Colville in winter? He kept his tone deliberately casual, though the question had been burning since she'd mentioned it. Eleanor's fingers went to the gold locket at her throat, a gesture he'd noticed before something unconscious, a habit born of worry or remembrance. I'm looking for someone, she finally said. My brother Thomas. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the fire. Thomas was always restless. Brilliant, but unable to settle. After father died last spring, he disappeared, left a note saying he'd found an opportunity out west. Her hand tightened around the locket. 3 months ago, I received a letter from him, postmarked from Colville. He said he'd made a discovery that would change everything, that we'd never want for anything again. Gold, Marcus stated flatly. He'd seen it before, the fever that drove men to madness in early graves. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded, or silver. The letter was vague, deliberately so. He mentioned precautions and interested parties who might intercept his correspondence. Her expression clouded, then nothing. 2 more months with no word. I sent telegrams, but there is no office in Colville. Finally, I decided to come myself. Alone? In winter? Marcus couldn't keep the judgment from his voice. Her chin lifted. I had little choice. Our father's death left ... complications. The house was sold to cover debts. Thomas has the only family heirloom of value, this locket and its matching piece. She touched the gold oval again. They contain miniatures of our parents. Beyond sentiment, they're the only connection I have left to my family. Marcus studied her with new understanding. Not just stubbornness then, but desperation. He knew something about that, the reckless courage born of having nothing left to lose. Your brother's likely moved on, he said, more gently than before. Men chasing dreams rarely stay in one place long. Perhaps, Eleanor's voice was steady, but I have to know. He's all I have left in the world. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, too raw and honest to be anything but truth. Marcus looked away, uncomfortable with her vulnerability and the unwelcome sympathy it stirred. Colville's a hard place, he warned. Mining town with more saloons than churches. No place for a woman alone. I'm aware of the risks. A hint of steel returned to her tone. I've faced worse odds. Something in her words made him look up sharply. For the first time, he truly saw beyond the refined exterior to the determination beneath. This was no sheltered society girl on a whim, despite her polished accent and delicate appearance. What aren't you telling me about your brother, Miss Chase? She met his gaze unflinchingly. What aren't you telling me about the past 15 years, Mr. Blackwood? Stalemate. They regarded each other across the room. Two people with secrets they'd carried too long to easily surrender. The fire popped loudly, breaking the tension. Marcus rose abruptly, setting aside his whittling. Need to check the animals once more before full dark. He pulled on his coat and gloves, ignoring her concerned expression. Bar the door after me. I'll knock 3 times when I return. The blast of frigid air when he stepped outside cleared his head. He stood for a moment on the porch, letting the cold burn his lungs, ground him back in reality. The woman was making him uneasy, stirring questions and memories best left buried. In the barn, the animals greeted him with familiar sounds, the soft nickering of horses, the shuffling of hooves. He moved among them with automatic efficiency, checking water, distributing a final portion of feed. The routine tasks steadied his nerves. In the last stall, his bay mare nudged his shoulder, seeking attention. Marcus obliged, running a hand down her sleek neck. This woman's trouble, he told the horse quietly. But she'd be gone soon enough. Back to normal. Just you and me. The horse snorted as if in disagreement. Don't get sentimental, he muttered. Not like I've gone soft. Yet as he secured the barn for the night, he found himself glancing back at the cabin, where warm light glowed from the windows. For the first time in years, someone was waiting for his return. The realization unsettled him more than it should have. When he reached the porch, he stomped snow from his boots and knocked 3 times as promised. The bar lifted immediately, as if she'd been standing just inside, waiting. Eleanor opened the door, relief visible on her face before she masked it. I was beginning to worry. Marcus stepped inside, bringing a swirl of snowflakes with him. Storm's worse. Path to the barn is nearly invisible now. She helped him remove his coat, her movements hampered by her own weakness. He noticed she'd rebraided her hair and washed her face. The bandage on her head had been neatly retied. You should be resting, he chided, hanging his coat by the fire to dry. I'm stronger than I appear, Miss Blackwood. She returned to the bed, but perched on its edge rather than lying down. While you were out, I took the liberty of making tea. I hope you don't mind. Indeed, the kettle steamed on the wood stove, and 2 tin cups waited nearby. The domestic scene struck him as oddly intimate, someone using his things, anticipating his return. Been a while since anyone made tea in this cabin, he admitted, pouring cups for them both. Your wife? She asked gently. Marcus handed her a cup, his expression shuddered. Yes. Eleanor accepted the tea, careful not to let their fingers touch. I apologize, shouldn't pry. He settled back in his chair, the tea warming his hand. Catherine, he said after a long pause. Her name was Catherine. She liked her tea with honey when we could get it. The name felt strange on his tongue, unused for so long, yet speaking it aloud didn't bring the crushing pain he'd expected, just a dull ache, familiar as an old wound in cold weather. Eleanor smiled softly. My mother was the same, said sugar was too harsh for proper tea. They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea as the storm raged outside. For the first time since she'd arrived, the quiet between them felt companionable rather than strained. Thank you, Eleanor finally said, for saving my life, for sharing your home. She gestured to the cabin around them. I know it can't be easy having a stranger disrupt your solitude. Marcus stared into his cup. Suppose we all need saving sometime. The words emerged unbidden, surprising him as much as her. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the reluctant truth he'd offered. Outside, the wind howled like a creature in pain, battering against the walls that sheltered them. But inside, the small flame of tentative connection burned, fragile but persistent against the darkness. Morning arrived with deceptive brightness. Sunlight glinting off snow so brilliant it hurt the eyes. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape, familiar shapes buried or altered beyond recognition, the world smoothed into rolling white contours. Marcus stood on the porch, assessing the damage. Drifts rose nearly to the eaves on the north side of the cabin. The path to the barn had vanished entirely. Even the towering pines bent under their frozen burden, branches drooping toward earth. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Eleanor stepped out, wrapped in his buffalo coat and a woolen blanket, her breath clouding before her face. It's beautiful, she whispered, eyes wide at the pristine expanse. It's dangerous, Marcus corrected. Snow that deep hides all manner of hazards, and it'll be days before the pass is clear enough to travel. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the mountains, where jagged peaks rose like teeth against the painfully blue sky. Thomas is out there somewhere. Marcus didn't respond. False reassurances weren't his way. Instead, he gestured to the barn to check the animals. You should go back inside where it's warm. I've been inside for days, she replied. I'll help. He eyed her skeptically. She looked better. The pallor had receded from her cheeks, replaced by healthy color, but she was still weak, favoring her left leg where frostbite had damaged the tissue. Suit yourself, he finally said, but stay in my footsteps. Snow's deep enough to swallow you whole in places. Together they forged a path to the barn, Marcus breaking trail while Eleanor followed carefully in the holes his boots created. The simple journey left her winded, but she refused his offer to carry her back to the cabin. I'm not an invalid, she insisted, though she leaned briefly against the barn door to catch her breath. Inside, the familiar warmth and scent of hay greeted them. Marcus moved efficiently from stall to stall, checking each animal while Eleanor watched. You care for them, she observed, not just as property but as living creatures. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with her perception. They depend on me, and that matters to you, being depended upon. It wasn't a question. He turned to face her, irritation flickering across his features. You make too many assumptions, Miss Chase. Perhaps. She stepped further into the barn, running a hand along the smoothly planed wood of a stall door. Or perhaps I simply recognize what I see. A man who claims to prefer solitude yet maintains a homestead that requires constant care. A man who says he wants no company yet risks his life to save a stranger. You're reading too much into necessity, he muttered. Eleanor smiled faintly. Am I? You could have left me to die. Many would have, especially finding me on their land with no explanation. That what you think of me? That I'd leave a person to freeze to death? No. Her voice soft. That's precisely my point. You wouldn't. Despite everything you've lost, despite your determination to live apart from the world, you retain your humanity. She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. That's a rare quality, Mr. Blackwood. Marcus turned away, discomfited by her insight and the warmth it kindled. He busied himself with the feed bucket, measuring oats with more care than necessary. You'll need provisions when you leave, he said gruffly, changing the subject. Path to Colville will be treacherous. I can spare some supplies. Enough to get you there if you're still determined to go. I am. Her voice regained its steel. But I appreciate your generosity. I'll repay you when I can. Not necessary. Nevertheless, I insist. She limped to the barn door, looking out at the snow-covered yard. How soon do you think the pass will clear enough for travel? Marcus considered the question, weighing honesty against kindness. A week, maybe more. Depends on whether another storm follows. This time of year, they often come in succession. Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded resolutely. Then I'll do my best not to be a burden in the meantime. Perhaps I can earn my keep somehow. The suggestion surprised him. Most people of her obvious breeding would consider themselves guests, not obligated to contribute. He studied her more carefully, the determined set of her jaw, practical way she'd adapted to their circumstances despite her injury. You know how to cook? He asked finally. A small smile touched her lips. I'm no chef, but yes, I can manage a decent meal. Though I should warn you, my brother always claimed my biscuits could serve as ammunition in a pinch. The unexpected humor caught Marcus off guard. A short, rusty sound escaped him, something close to a laugh. Eleanor's smile widened in response, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The moment passed quickly, but it left something changed between them. A crack in the wall of formality they'd they'd maintained. "I'll show you where things are," he said, leading the way back to the cabin. The day passed in a rhythm unfamiliar to Marcus's solitary existence. Eleanor moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, learning the locations of supplies, the peculiarities of the wood stove, the methods he used to preserve food through winter. Despite her weakened state, she insisted on helping washing dishes, sweeping the packed earth floor, even attempting to repair a tear in one of his shirts while he split more firewood outside. By evening, the cabin had subtly transformed. Nothing had physically changed, yet the space felt different, warmer somehow, more inhabited than it had been in years. Marcus noticed the shift with unease. He'd built his life around absence, around carefully maintained emptiness. Having someone else in his space, especially someone as observant as Eleanor Chase, felt like a vulnerability he couldn't afford. They ate a simple supper of beans and salt pork that she'd seasoned with dried herbs found in his stores. The improvement in flavor was noticeable, though he said nothing of it. "Tell me about Colville," Eleanor said as they finished eating. "What should I expect when I arrive?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "It's grown since I was last there. Mining settlements, so mostly men. Rough place, especially in winter when tempers fray from being confined. And the people? Anyone trustworthy? Sheriff's decent enough, name's Hollister. Old-timer, fought for the Union, believes in law even when it's inconvenient." He paused, weighing his words. "Saloon keeper to McCready. Lost an arm at Shiloh, but he's fair. Doesn't water the whiskey or cheat at cards." Eleanor nodded, committing the names to memory. "Anyone I should avoid?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Plenty, but particularly Jerome Sullivan. Owns the largest mine, half the businesses in town, and enough men to enforce his will when crossed. Is he dangerous? Depends on your definition." Marcus met her gaze directly. "He doesn't dirty his own hands, but men disappear when they have something he wants, especially men who make claims about discoveries. Gold, silver, whatever your brother thought he found." Eleanor paled slightly. "You think Sullivan might be involved in Thomas's disappearance?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that your brother's letter mentioned interested parties and precautions. In Colville, that usually means Sullivan." She absorbed this in silence, fingers unconsciously finding the locket at her throat. "Then I'll need to be careful how I make inquiries. You'll need more than care." Sullivan's men watched the stagecoach arrivals. A woman traveling alone asking questions about missing miners. "I'd draw attention immediately." "What would you suggest then?" "I can hardly disguise myself as a miner." Marcus hesitated, an idea forming that he was reluctant to voice. It was foolish, impulsive, everything he'd avoided for 15 years. "You could claim to be married," he finally said. "A woman joining her husband would raise fewer questions." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly would this fictional husband be? Someone known in the area but not frequently seen. Someone with enough of a reputation that Sullivan's men would hesitate to interfere." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Me." Surprise registered on her face. "You would do that? Accompany me to Colville?" "I didn't say that," he replied quickly. "Just that using my name might offer some protection. I've had dealings with Sullivan in the past. He's cautious where I'm concerned." Eleanor studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see too much. "What kind of dealings?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "The kind that established boundaries." She waited, clearly expecting more explanation, but he offered none. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "I appreciate the suggestion, Mr. Blackwood, but I wouldn't want to impose further or involve you in what might be a dangerous situation. You'd be safer," he said simply. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "Why does that matter to you?" The question caught him off guard. Why did it matter? He'd done his duty by saving her life, offering shelter. Her subsequent fate shouldn't concern him. He'd worked hard to sever such connection, to care about nothing that could be lost. Yet he found himself unable to contemplate sending her alone into a place like Colville, especially if she was right about her brother's disappearance being something more sinister than a miner moving on to better prospects. "Because," he finally said, "I've seen enough death in these mountains." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could offer. Eleanor seemed to understand this, nodding slowly. "Then I accept your help, Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, "and I promise not to make you regret it." Outside, night had fallen completely, stars emerging in a sky swept clean by the departed storm. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that echoed across the valley before fading into silence. Inside the cabin, something shifted between two strangers. A tentative alliance formed against a wilderness that forgave no weakness, and a human threat that recognized no law but power. 3 days passed in unexpected harmony. The snow began to settle, compacting under its own weight, though drifts still towered in places. Each morning, Marcus checked the pass, gauging conditions with the experienced eye of a man who'd survived 15 mountain winters. Each evening, he returned with the same assessment. Not yet. Eleanor's strength returned gradually. The gash on her head healed to a thin red line, and she moved about the cabin with increasing confidence, though her frostbitten toes still caused pain when she stood too long. She'd taken over the cooking entirely, transforming Marcus's simple provisions into meals that reminded him of times he'd tried to forget. On the 4th evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Eleanor worked on mending one of her torn stockings. Marcus cleaned his rifle nearby, the familiar ritual requiring no thought, leaving his mind dangerously free to wander. "Tell me about your dealings with Sullivan," Eleanor said suddenly, breaking their companionable silence. Marcus's hands stilled on the rifle. He glanced up to find her watching him, her expression open but determined. "If I'm to use your name for protection," she continued, "I should know what that means. What history exists between you?" He set aside the cleaning rod, considering how much to reveal. It was 8 years ago. Sullivan had just acquired the Blue Summit mine and was expanding aggressively. Wanted this land for timber rights, and you refused to sell. Marcus nodded. "This land belonged to Catherine's family. Been in their name since before the territory was established. I wasn't about to hand it over to a man like Sullivan. So what happened? He sent men, 3 of them, armed. Middle of the night." Marcus's voice flattened. "They thought they'd find an old rancher living alone, easy to intimidate." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. What did they find instead? A man who learned to kill in the war and never quite forgot how. He met her gaze directly. "I buried them on the North Ridge, rode into Colville the next morning and told Sullivan if any more of his men set foot on my property, he'd join them." She absorbed this without flinching. "And he believed you?" "He did." Marcus picked up the rifle again, resuming his methodical cleaning. "Sullivan's a businessman first. Risk versus reward. Decided I wasn't worth the trouble when there was easier timber to acquire." Eleanor studied him with those perceptive eyes. "There's more to it than that, isn't there? The way you said his name. It's personal somehow." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd forgotten what it was like to be around someone who paid attention, who could read the subtleties most missed. "Sullivan was at Chancellorsville," he finally said. "Different side, different uniform, but I recognized him in Colville years later. He changed his name, but not his face." "And did he recognize you?" "Yes." Marcus's voice held old bitterness. "He commanded the unit that burned my family's farm in Virginia. I was 16 fighting 40 miles away. By the time I made it home, there was nothing left but ashes and shallow graves." Eleanor's hand paused in her "I'm sorry. War," he said flatly. "Both sides did terrible things. That doesn't make it easier to bear." She set her work aside. "Did you confront him about it?" "No. What would be the point?" Marcus reassembled the rifle with practiced movements, but he knew that I knew. It was there between us, unspoken. Maybe that's why he decided not to push further, not fear of me, but fear of the past catching up to him. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this revelation. "And now I'm asking you to face him again, indirectly at least. By lending me your name." "It's just a name," he replied, though they both knew it was more than that. She rose and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. "My brother may have crossed a dangerous man, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps it's unfair to involve you in our troubles." Marcus watched her silhouette against the night-dark glass. In just a few days, he'd grown accustomed to her presence in his cabin, the soft sounds of her movement, the faint scent of pine soap in her hair, the way she hummed tunelessly when absorbed in a task. The thought of her facing Sullivan's world alone stirred something protective he'd thought long dead. "Life isn't fair, Miss Chase," he said finally. "Never has been. Question is what we do despite that." She turned back to him, her face half in shadow. "And what do you intend to do?" Before he could answer, a sound cut through the night, a long, mournful howl, followed by another, closer. "Wolves." Marcus rose immediately, reaching for his coat. "Need to check the livestock. Wolves are bolder when snow's deep and game is scarce." Eleanor followed him to the door. "Be careful, Dot." Single quotes. He nodded once, then stepped into the moonlit night, rifle in hand. The cold air bit at his exposed skin, but the storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional creak of snow-laden branches. The howls came again, not from the ridge as usual, but from the direction of the barn. Too close. Marcus moved quickly through the deep snow, alert to every shadow. The moon cast blue light across the landscape, creating a world of silver and indigo. As he approached the barn, he saw them, 3 gray shapes slinking around the far side, seeking entry. The horses inside whinnied in fear, sensing the predators. Marcus raised his rifle, taking careful aim at the largest wolf. He fired once, the report cracking across the stillness like lightning. The wolf yelped and fell. The others scattered briefly, then regrouped, hunger overriding caution. He chambered another round, but before he could fire, a second shot rang out from behind him. Another wolf dropped. Marcus turned to see Eleanor standing on the porch, a small derringer clutched in her hands. "I told you to stay inside," he called, moving toward the barn as the remaining wolf retreated into the darkness. "You're welcome," she replied, lowering the pistol. Her breath clouded before her face in the frigid air. Inside the barn, Marcus found the livestock unharmed but agitated. He checked the walls for any signs of the wolves' attempts to enter, finding claw marks on the heavy oak door but no breach. When he emerged, Eleanor stood waiting, now properly bundled in his buffalo coat, the derringer still in her hand. "Where were you hiding that?" he asked, eyeing the small pistol. "In my boot. It's the one thing the guy didn't take when he abandoned me." She tucked it into her pocket. "A woman traveling alone needs protection, Mr. Blackwood. You're full of surprises, Miss Chase." A small smile touched her lips. "So I've been told." They walked back to the cabin together. The night silent again except for the crunch of their boots in the snow. Marcus found himself reconsidering his assessment of her. Not just determined, but resourceful, capable. "Where did you learn to shoot?" he asked as they reached the porch. "My father taught both Thomas and me after our mother died. Said the world was unkind to those who couldn't defend themselves." She stamped snow from her boots. "I'm a better shot with a proper pistol." The derringer pulls to the left. Inside, Eleanor built up the fire while Marcus hung his coat. The domesticity of the moment struck him again, the easy coordination of their movements, the unspoken understanding of tasks. "We should leave for Colville in 2 days," he said abruptly. Eleanor turned, surprise evident on her face. "We? The pass will be clear enough by then. Dangerous still, but passable if we're careful." He met her gaze steadily. "And yes, week, I'll take you to find your brother." "Why?" The question was direct, without pretense. Marcus looked away, uncomfortable with examination. "Wolves are moving down from the high country. Food's scarce. They'll keep coming. Better to secure the cabin properly and go, rather than leave you to make the journey alone later." It was a practical justification, and not entirely untrue, but they both knew there was more to his decision, something neither was ready to name. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," he warned. "Colville in winter is no place for gratitude." Nevertheless, she insisted, moving closer until she stood directly before him. In the firelight, her eyes appeared amber, warm with something that made his chest tighten. "Thank you, Marcus." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The sound of it in her voice stirred memories of another life, one where his name had been spoken with affection rather than wary respect or outright fear. Before he could respond, Eleanor reached out and briefly touched his arm, a gesture so simple yet so foreign to his solitary existence that it left him momentarily speechless. "We should prepare supplies tomorrow," she said, stepping back. "Make lists of what we'll need." Marcus nodded, grateful for the return to practical matters. "I'll check the sled runners. Snow's too deep for horses in places. We'll take the mule and sled part way, then horses when the trail permits." They spent the next hour discussing preparations, the rhythm of planning displacing the moment of unexpected intimacy, yet something had shifted between, a boundary crossed that couldn't be reestablished. That night, as Eleanor slept in his bed and Marcus kept his customary vigil by the fire, he found himself questioning the wisdom of his decision. 15 years he'd lived apart from the world, healing wounds that never quite closed, protecting himself from further loss. Now he was voluntarily returning to Colville, facing Sullivan again. All for a woman he barely knew and a brother who might already be beyond help. Outside, the wolves howled again, distant but persistent. Predators and prey, hunters and hunted, the eternal dance of survival. Marcus stared into the dying embers, wondering which role awaited him in Colville, and whether he remembered enough of civilization to navigate its dangers. In the corner, Eleanor murmured something in her sleep, turning restlessly. Without thinking, Marcus moved to adjust the blanket that had slipped from her shoulders, his calloused hand gentle as it tucked the wool around her. She settled at his touch, her breathing deepening once more. Marcus returned to his chair, but the warmth of that brief contact lingered on his skin like a memory of another life, or perhaps a glimpse of one not yet lived. Dawn arrived with grudging light, the sun obscured by heavy gray clouds that promised more snow by nightfall. Marcus rose early, his body accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life regardless of circumstance. Eleanor was already awake, folding the blankets on his bed with neat precision. "We should reach Colville before the next storm hits," he said by way of greeting, stoking the fire in the wood stove. Eleanor nodded, her expression resolute. "I've made an inventory of your provisions. There's enough dried meat and beans to last the journey with some despair." They worked together throughout the morning, gathering supplies, checking equipment, preparing the cabin for their absence. Marcus showed her how to bank the fire so it wouldn't die completely while they were gone, how to secure the shutters against wind and prowling predators. "Will it still be here when we return?" Eleanor asked, surveying the cabin that had become a sanctuary. "These walls have weathered worse than an empty week," Marcus replied. Then, realizing the implication of her words that she assumed they would return together, he added gruffly, "Though you might find more comfortable lodging in town once your business is concluded." Eleanor fastened the leather satchel containing her few belongings. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Mer. Blackwood, once we find Thomas, we'll trouble you no further." Her formal tone suggested a retreat to their earlier wariness, and Marcus found himself strangely disappointed by it. He busied himself with checking the rifle, avoiding her gaze. By midday, they were ready. The sled was packed with essentials, extra blankets, food, ammunition, medical supplies. Marcus harnessed the sturdy mule, an ill-tempered beast but sure-footed in snow. 2 horses would follow behind, tethered to the sled until the trail widened enough to ride. "One last thing," Marcus said before they departed. He disappeared into the cabin, returning with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "You'll need this in town." Eleanor unwrapped it to find a man's coat, well worn but of good quality, and a wide-brimmed hat. "Your husband's clothing?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded once, his expression unreadable. "If you're to play the role of Mrs. Blackwood, you'll need to dress the part. Sullivan's men will be watching." Eleanor ran her fingers over the heavy wool coat, understanding the significance of what he offered. These weren't just garments, but relics of his past life, preserved for reasons he perhaps couldn't articulate even to himself. "I'll take good care of him," she promised. He helped her into the coat, which hung large on her frame but would provide necessary warmth. The hat she tucked into the sled for later use. Then, with a final glance at the cabin, they set off into the snow-covered wilderness. The journey began in silence, broken only by the creak of the sled runners and the mule's occasional snort. Marcus led the way, breaking trail where necessary, checking for hidden obstacles beneath the snow. Eleanor sat on the sled, scanning the white landscape with alert eyes. As they descended from Marcus's highland property, the snow thinned slightly, and the terrain opened into broader valleys. By mid-afternoon, they reached a frozen creek where Marcus called a halt to rest the animals. "We're making good time," he observed, offering Eleanor his canteen. "Creek means we're halfway to Miller's Pass. After that, it's mostly downhill to Colville." She drank gratefully, wiping her mouth with the back of her gloved hand. "Have you ever found gold up here?" The question surprised him. "Not for lack of looking in the early days. Catherine had stories from her grandfather about color in the creeks, but I never found more than a few flakes. Nothing worth pursuing." "Perhaps Thomas found what you couldn't," Eleanor suggested. Marcus shook his head. If there was anything substantial, Sullivan would have claimed it years ago. His surveyors combed these mountains like locusts when the mines first opened. Yet Thomas wrote about a discovery significant enough to change our fortunes. Eleanor's brow furrowed. He wasn't prone to exaggeration or fantasy. "Men change in these mountains," Marcus replied. "Dreams take on substance in the isolation." Or ... or what? She prompted when he hesitated. Or he found something else entirely. Something Sullivan wants badly enough to make a man disappear. Eleanor tensed. What could that be? Before Marcus could answer, a sound carried on the wind metal on metal, distant but distinct. He raised a hand for silence, eyes scanning the ridgeline. "Someone's up there," he murmured, reaching for his rifle. "Stay with the animals." He moved silently through the snow, climbing the gentle slope until he had a clear view of the creek's meandering path. There, half hidden among a stand of pines, stood 3 riders. Marcus dropped to a crouch, observing with narrowed eyes. The men were heavily armed, rifles across their saddles, pistols visible at their waists. Not hunters. Their clothing was too fine, their horses too well bred for common mountain men. One rider pointed downstream in the direction Marcus and Eleanor were traveling. The others nodded and they began moving, following the creek's path. Marcus retreated carefully, returning to Eleanor with quick, purposeful strides. "Sullivan's men," he said grimly, securing his rifle to the sled. "3 of them, heading this way. We need to move now." Eleanor's eyes widened. "How do you know they're Sullivan's?" "Town clothes, expensive horses, moving with purpose. They're searching for something. Or someone." He helped her onto the sled. "We'll cut east, away from the creek. It's rougher terrain, but we might lose them in the pine." They abandoned the easier path, Marcus leading the mule into a dense forest of lodgepole pine. The sled struggled through deeper snow, forcing Marcus to help push when the mule balked at particularly difficult passages. "Could they be looking for us specifically?" Eleanor asked as they paused to catch their breath in the shelter of a massive boulder. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Possible, but unlikely. No one knew you were heading to my property when your guide abandoned, and I haven't been to town in months. Then what are they doing out here?" He considered this, frowning. "Sullivan doesn't send armed men into the mountains in winter without good reason. My guess? They're looking for whatever your brother found. Then Thomas might still be alive," Eleanor said, hope brightening her voice. "If they're still searching, it means he hasn't told them what they want to know. Or they're ensuring no one else finds it," Marcus cautioned. "Don't build hopes on speculation." They pressed on, the day waning rapidly as they navigated the difficult terrain. The clouds thickened overhead, and the first fat snowflakes began to fall just as dusk approached. "We need shelter," Marcus announced, studying the darkening sky. "Storm's coming faster than I expected. We're miles from anywhere. There's an old hunting cabin about a half-mile east," adjusting their course. "Used it years ago when working this side of the mountain. Might still be standing." The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace, its roof partially collapsed in one corner. But the walls were solid and the chimney clear enough to risk a fire. Marcus worked quickly to make the space habitable, patching the roof gap with canvas from their supplies while Eleanor cleared debris from the hearth. By the time full darkness fell, they had a small fire burning and the animals sheltered in the meager lean-to attached to the cabin's side. Outside, the storm gathered strength, wind howling through the pines with increasing fury. Inside, Marcus and Eleanor sat close to the fire, sharing a meal of jerky and hard biscuits. "I've been thinking about what your brother might have found," Marcus said, breaking their thoughtful silence. "These mountains hold secrets beyond gold." Eleanor looked up, curiosity evident in her expression. "What kind of secrets?" "During the war, there were rumors of Confederate supply caches hidden throughout the territories. Gold, weapons, documents, insurance against defeat." He stoked the fire carefully. Most were recovered or lost to time, but stories persist about one significant cache hidden in these mountains. "You think Thomas found a Confederate treasure?" It would explain Sullivan's interest. "He fought for the South, lost everything after the surrender. A cache like that would mean more to him than just wealth. It would be a piece of the cause he still believes in, despite the show he puts on as a respectable businessman." Eleanor considered this, fingers unconsciously finding the locket at her throat. "Thomas's letter mentioned papers that would change everything. I assumed he meant a gold claim, but perhaps ... documents can be worth more than gold to the right people," Marcus agreed, "especially if they contain sensitive information, names of agents or sympathizers reinvented themselves after the war. Men like Sullivan." The fire popped and sparked, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Outside, the storm raged, increasing violence. But within the crude shelter, A different kind of tension built, the shared awareness of a mystery taking shape, and the unspoken question of what they would do when they reached Colville. If Sullivan believes Thomas found something that could expose him, Eleanor said slowly, then my brother is in grave danger if he's still alive at all. Marcus met her gaze across the flames. Which means you'll be in danger too, the moment you start asking questions in town. I'm aware of the risk. Are you? He leaned forward, his expression intense. Sullivan rebuilt his life on lies. Men like that will do anything to protect what they've created. As will I, Eleanor replied, her chin lifting with familiar determination. Thomas is all I have left in this world. I won't abandon him. Marcus studied her face in the firelight, the resolve in her eyes, the quiet strength in her bearing. Something stirred in him, an admiration that went beyond mere respect for her courage. Then we'd better come up with a better plan than simply walking into town and announcing ourselves, he said finally. Because Sullivan's men won't be the only danger we face in Colville. What do you mean? Marcus's expression darkened. It's been 15 years since I've shown my face there. Some folks have long memories and longer grudges. The name Blackwood carries weight, but not all of it good. You never told me why you left civilization behind, Eleanor said quietly. What happened 15 years ago, Marcus? The use of his given name again, intimate, questioning. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, a silence heavy with unspoken histories and the weight of trust not yet fully given. Outside, the storm continued its assault, sealing them together in their temporary refuge like two survivors of a shipwreck clinging to the same piece of flotsam, connected by circumstance but also by something more deliberate. A choice being made with each shared confidence, each moment of vulnerability permitted. The fire had dimmed to glowing embers, casting the cabin in amber shadows. Outside, the storm had softened from rage to persistence, snow falling in a steady curtain that muffled all sound. Marcus added another log to the fire, watching as flames licked tentatively at the dry wood. 15 years ago, he began, his voice low but steady. Catherine and I had a daughter, Emma. She was 7 when the cough came. Eleanor sat perfectly still, understanding instinctively that any movement might break the spell of this rare confidence. Winter was harsh that year too, snow deeper than anyone had seen in decades. Marcus stared into the flames as if reading his memories there. Emma got sick just after Christmas. Nothing serious at first. Children get sick all the time, but it worsened. He drew a slow breath. Catherine insisted we needed to get her to the doctor in Colville. I thought it too dangerous with the snow, wanted to wait for a break in the weather. His hands tightened into fists. She was right, I was wrong. By the time I agreed, Emma was struggling to breathe. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, already anticipating the story's cruel turn. We hitched the sled, bundled Emma in blankets, made it halfway to town when the snow started again. Not just snow, but a blizzard that came from nowhere. His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes reflected ancient pain. Horse spooked at a fallen tree, overturned the sled, quoted and hit her head. Emma was thrown into a drift. He fell silent for a long moment. When he continued, his voice had hollowed. By the time I found them both, got the sled righted, Emma was barely conscious. Catherine never woke up again. I drove that sled like a madman, holding both of them, trying to keep them warm. The fire popped loudly in the silence that followed. We reached Colville too late. Emma died in the doctor's office. Catherine followed the next morning without ever opening her eyes. He looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. The town buried them together while I watched. Then I rode home and didn't set foot in Colville again. Marcus, Eleanor whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. He shook his head as if dismissing sympathy. 15 years is a long time to live with choices. The townspeople said it wasn't my fault. The storm was sudden, unpredictable, but they didn't have to look at an empty house every day. Didn't have to know that if I'd just listened to Catherine sooner, You couldn't have known, Eleanor said gently. Doesn't matter. I made the wrong choice and they paid the price. He poked at the fire with unnecessary force, so I built a life where my choices wouldn't hurt anyone but myself. Seemed safer that way. Eleanor moved closer, close enough that her shoulder brushed against his. Until you found me in the snow. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing past the surface to something essential. Yes, the single word held acknowledgement of something neither quite understood. How the simple act of saving her life had unwittingly begun to dismantle the walls he'd built around himself. And now you're returning to the place you swore never to see again, she said. Because of me and my brother, not just because of you. His voice roughened. Maybe it's time I faced what I left behind. Can't outrun the past forever, no matter how fast you ride. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, as the fire burned low and the night deepened around them. No further words seemed necessary or possible. Some understandings transcend language, emerging instead from shared solitude and recognized pain. Eventually, Eleanor's head drooped against his shoulder, exhaustion claiming her despite the hard floor and uncertain shelter. Marcus remained awake, listening to the storm's diminishing fury and the soft rhythm of her breathing. Sleep, he murmured when she stirred apologetically. I'll keep watch. Morning arrived with startling brightness, the storm having cleared during the night to leave a world transformed. Every branch, every surface gleamed beneath a fresh coat of snow that sparkled in the sunrise like crushed diamonds. They set out early, abandoning the sled for horseback as the trail widened and the snow grew less prohibitive. Eleanor rode the gentler of the two horses, wearing Catherine's coat and hat, her hair tucked beneath the brim. From a distance, she might indeed pass for a rancher's wife returning home after an absence. "We'll reach Miller's Pass by midday," Marcus said as they crested a hill that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. "Colville lies just beyond." Eleanor nodded, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "And Sullivan's men? They'll have sought shelter from the storm. With luck, we'll reach town before they return from the mountains." "What's our plan once we arrive?" she asked, adjusting her position in the saddle. "First, establish your presence as Mrs. Blackwood, returning after visiting relatives back east. We'll take rooms at McCready's. He keeps quarters above the saloon." "Decent enough, and he owes me a favor." Marcus scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. "Then we start asking careful questions. Hamas would have needed supplies, equipment, he'd have left an impression. And if Sullivan's men recognize me from the stagecoach, they won't be looking for Marcus Blackwood's wife," he replied. "The disguise isn't about changing your appearance so much as changing the story around you. A woman alone draws attention. A woman with a husband, particularly one with my reputation, becomes less interesting." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts about what awaited them in Colville. The mountains gradually gave way to foothills, the snow thinning as they descended in elevation. By mid-morning, they encountered the first sign of civilization, crude wooden bridge spanning a half-frozen creek. "Boundary of Sullivan's timber claim," Marcus explained, nodding toward a blaze mark on a nearby pine. "We're getting close." As they crossed the bridge, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the stillness. Splinters flew from the railing inches from Marcus's hand. "Down!" he shouted, drawing his own rifle as he slid from the saddle. Eleanor reacted instantly, dismounting on the far side of her horse, using the animal as cover. Another shot rang out, this one going wide. "Can you see them?" she called, her voice remarkably steady. Marcus scanned the tree line, eyes narrowed. "Ridge to the west. Single shooter. Stay low." He raised his rifle, aiming carefully toward a flicker of movement among the pines. Before he could fire, a voice called out, "That's far enough, strangers. This is private property. We're just passing through to Colville," Marcus shouted back. "We mean no harm." Pause, then "Show yourselves." Marcus exchanged a glance with Eleanor. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Then louder, "We're coming out. Hold your fire." They stepped into the open, Marcus slightly ahead, his rifle lowered but ready. From the trees emerged a bearded man in a heavy coat, his own rifle still trained in their direction. "This ain't the main road to town," the man said suspiciously. "Who are you folks?" "Name's Blackwood, Marcus Blackwood. This is my wife. We're headed home after wintering at my northern property." The man's eyes widened slightly. "Blackwood? The rancher who shot 3 of Sullivan's men years back?" Marcus inclined his head slightly. "The same. And you are Jim Halloran?" "I work security for M.R. Sullivan's timber operation." The rifle lowered fraction. "Didn't know you had a wife, Blackwood." "Been married a while now," Marcus replied evenly. "Eleanor was back east visiting family. Came out to join me for the season." Halloran studied Eleanor, who met his gaze with composed dignity. "Pretty far north for a social call," he observed. "My husband prefers his privacy," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying just the right note of Eastern refinement. "As do I." After a moment, Halloran lowered his rifle completely. "Well, you're on Sullivan land now. Main road's 2 miles east. I suggest you use it." "Much obliged," Marcus said, helping Eleanor back into her saddle. "Give Mr. Sullivan my regards." As they rode away, Eleanor kept her posture straight, resisting the urge to look back. Only when they were well beyond sight of the guard did she exhale shakily. "That was too close," she murmured. Marcus nodded grimly. "And our first problem, Halloran will report the encounter to Sullivan. By the time we reach Colville, he'll know I've returned and that I brought a wife no one's ever seen before. Then we've lost the element of surprise, perhaps. Or perhaps we've gained something more valuable." Marcus's expression was thoughtful. "Sullivan will be curious now. He'll want to see the woman who married the reclusive Marcus Blackwood. Might give us an opening we wouldn't have had otherwise." Eleanor considered this. "You think he'll approach us directly?" "Not at me. He'll watch first, assess. But yes, eventually he'll make contact. Sullivan can't resist exercising his power in town. Welcoming new residents or returning ones would be natural." They followed Halloran's directions to the main road, a rutted dirt path now partially visible beneath the melting snow. As they traveled, signs of human habitation increased: felled trees, occasional fenced pastures, thin trails of smoke rising from distant chimneys. "We're close now," Marcus said as they rounded a bend and the valley opened before them. Colville. In the distance, nestled against the base of the mountains, lay a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by the scars of mining operations, tailings piles, scaffolding, the skeletal frames of ore processing structures. Even from afar, the town projected a sense of rawness, of civilization imposed rather than grown naturally from the land. Eleanor straightened in her saddle, eyes fixed on their destination. Somewhere in that rough collection of humanity was the answer to her brother's fate, and perhaps the key to a future neither she nor Marcus had anticipated when the storm brought them together. Colville hadn't changed much in 15 years. The same muddy main street lined with false-fronted buildings, the same reek of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and cheap whiskey. Only the mines had grown. Their scaffolding and processing buildings sprawling across the mountainside like an advancing disease. Marcus and Eleanor rode down the center of town at a deliberate pace, not rushing, not skulking like people who had every right to be there. Heads turned as they passed, conversations paused, recognition flickered across older faces, followed by disbelief. "They remember you," Eleanor murmured. "Small towns never forget," Marcus replied, "especially when you leave under a cloud of grief that makes everyone uncomfortable." They stopped before a weathered two-story building with McCready's painted in faded letters across its facade. Music and raucous laughter spilled from the open doorway despite the early hour. Marcus dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The gesture wasn't entirely for show after hours in the saddle. Her injured leg had stiffened painfully. "Let me do the talking," he said quietly. McCready's unpredictable, but he respects straightforwardness. Inside, the saloon was half full, miners from the night shift drowning the memory of darkness. Gamblers hunched over cards. A few women in tawdry finery circulating with practiced smiles. The piano player, a rail-thin man with fingers like spiders, stopped mid-chord when Marcus entered. The silence spread like ripples in a pond. At the far end of the bar, a broad-shouldered man with one empty sleeve pinned to his shoulder looked up sharply. He set down the glass he'd been polishing and made his way toward them. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, voice rough from years of cheap cigars. "Marcus Blackwood, back from the dead." "Not quite dead, McCready, just removed." Marcus met the man's gaze steadily. "Need rooms for a few days. My wife and I." McCready's eyebrows rose as he noticed Eleanor. "Wife? That's a development." He studied her with undisguised curiosity before extending his hand. "Angus McCready, ma'am, owner of this fine establishment." Eleanor took his hand with a smile that balanced warmth and reserve perfectly. "Eleanor Blackwood." "A pleasure, Mr. McCready." "English," McCready observed. "Or Boston?" "Both originally," she replied. "My father was a professor at Harvard before returning to London." McCready nodded appreciatively. "You've done well for yourself, Blackwood. Traded up from that mountain hermitage, I'd say." He gestured toward the stairs. "Got 2 rooms at the end of the hall. Not fancy, but clean enough. $2 a night, including breakfast. We'll take one," Marcus said. "And stable space for our horses." If McCready was surprised, he hit it well. "One it is. Boy out back will tend your animals. Anything else you need?" "Information," Marcus replied, lowering his voice. "About a man named Thomas Chase. Arrived a few months back. Might have been prospecting." McCready's expression shifted subtly. "Best discuss that upstairs. Too many ears down here, if you take my meaning." He led them up a narrow staircase to a short hallway with doors on either side. At the far end, he unlocked a room and stepped aside. "It's not much," he said as they entered, "but it's better than most in town." The room was indeed simpler: brass bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a small table with 2 chairs. But the floor was swept clean and the window overlooked the rear courtyard rather than the noisy street. McCready closed the door behind them. "Now about Thomas Chase. Young fella, educated speech, bit of a dreamer." Eleanor stepped forward eagerly. "You knew him? Is he still in town?" McCready's expression turned grave. "Knew him, yes. He stayed here when he first arrived. Paid fare, kept to himself mostly. But as to where he is now, ... single quotes," he hesitated. "No one's seen him in nearly 6 weeks." Eleanor's face paled. 6 weeks? What happened to him? That's the question, isn't it? McCready ran his hand through his thinning hair. "Chase was looking for something in these mountains. Spent days studying old maps, asking about caves and abandoned camps. Then one night he comes back excited, really excited. Says he's found it, whatever it was. The next morning he's gone. Room paid up, belongings taken, no goodbyes. He wouldn't have left without writing to me," Eleanor insisted. "Maybe not," McCready agreed. "But letters don't always reach their destination in these parts, especially if certain parties take an interest in them." "Sullivan," Marcus said. McCready's expression hardened. "I didn't say that, and you'd be wise not to. Either not if you want to stay healthy in this town." "But Thomas asked about the old Confederate cache, didn't he?" Marcus pressed. "The one rumored to be hidden in these mountains." McCready's single hand tightened around the doorknob. "Keep your voice down, man. Even walls have ears where Sullivan's concerned." He glanced nervously at the window. "Yes, your brother asked about the cache. Most newcomers do. It's a legend around here. But he was more persistent than most. Had documents, fragments of a map or journal." "Did he find it?" Eleanor asked intently. "If he did, he never said so directly. But that last night he was different, confident. Said he'd be leaving soon, heading back east with something valuable." McCready's voice dropped further. 2 days later, Sullivan's men were combing the mountains. Been at it ever since, especially the northern slopes. "Where we just came from," Marcus noted grimly. McCready nodded. "Which makes your timing interesting, to say the least." He studied them both with new wariness. "What's your stake in this, Blackwood? You never cared about treasure before." "I care about finding Miss Chase's brother," Marcus replied, then, seeing McCready's confusion, added, "Mrs. Blackwood is Thomas Chase's sister. We married recently after she came west seeking news of him." Understanding dawned in McCready's eyes. "I see. A convenient arrangement." When neither confirmed nor denied this, he continued, "Well, whatever your true connection, you're playing a dangerous game. Sullivan doesn't tolerate interference in his affairs." "We're not interfering," Eleanor said firmly. We're looking for my brother, that's all. McCready gave her a pitying look. In Colville, those might be the same thing, Mrs. Black. He moved toward the door. I'll send up hot water and something. Rest today. Tonight, when the saloon's busy, I'll introduce you to someone who might know more about your brother's movements. After McCready left, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of his news evident in her posture. He's alive, she said softly, or at least he was 6 weeks ago. Marcus moved to the window, checking the street below with habitual caution. McCready thinks Sullivan's involved in his disappearance. That's not good news. But if Thomas found the cash and managed to hide whatever was in it before Sullivan's men caught up to him. Her voice trailed off, hope warring with anxiety. That's a big if, Marcus cautioned, and it doesn't explain why he hasn't contact, unless he can't. Eleanor's fingers found her locket. A gesture Marcus now recognized as her unconscious tell when worried. If Sullivan has him somewhere. Let's not borrow trouble, Marcus advised. We need more information before drawing conclusions. A knock at the door announced the arrival of a young girl bearing a tray with bread, cheese, and a steaming pitcher of water. As Marcus thanked her, Eleanor rose to arrange their few belongings, moving stiffly from the long ride. When they were alone again, Marcus noticed her wincing as she bent to unpack her satchel. Your leg's troubling you, he observed. She straightened, attempting to mask her discomfort. It's nothing. It's just sore from riding. Let me see. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, extending her leg. Marcus knelt before her, gently rolling up her skirt to reveal the bandaged calf where frostbite had damaged the tissue. The skin around the bandage was inflamed, the leg swollen from knee to ankle. This isn't nothing, he said, frowning. You've pushed too hard. We had no choice, she replied. And I'm stronger than I look, so you keep saying. He reached for the pitcher of hot water and a clean cloth, but even strength has limits. Here, let me rewrap it. With surprising gentleness for hands so weathered, Marcus cleaned and dressed the wound. Eleanor watched him work, his head bent in concentration, his touch clinical yet somehow intimate. Thank you, she said when he finished. For this and for everything else. I couldn't have gotten this far without you. Marcus looked up, still kneeling before her. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of how their alliance had shifted into something neither had anticipated. We'll find him, he promised, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Whatever it takes. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with visible effort, Marcus rose and moved to the window again, creating distance between them. You should rest, he said, his back to her. Tonight might bring answers, but it will certainly bring complications. Eleanor settled onto the bed, fatigue evident in every line of her body. Will you rest too? He shook his head. Someone needs to keep watch. Sullivan will know we're here by now. As if summoned by his words, a commotion arose in the street below, raised voices, the clatter of hooves on hard-packed earth. Marcus peered through the curtain to see 3 riders pulling up before the saloon. The men he and Eleanor had spotted near the creek days earlier. Sullivan's men, he murmured, back from their search. Eleanor pushed herself up on one elbow. Do you think they followed us? No, just bad timing. He watched as the men dismounted, speaking briefly to a 4th man who appeared from the alley. Halloran, the guard they'd encountered at the bridge. But they know we're here now. What will they do? Marcus let the curtain fall back into place. Nothing immediately. They'll report to Sullivan, wait for instructions. He turned to face her, his expression grave. But make no mistake, the game has begun. From this moment, we're being watched. Outside, clouds gathered once more over the mountains, shrouding the peaks in shadow. Inside the small room above McCready's saloon, Marcus and Eleanor waited for night to fall, for information that might lead to Thomas, and for the inevitable confrontation with the man who controlled Colville like a private kingdom. The hunt for Thomas Chasen, whatever secret he'd discovered in the mountains, had officially begun. Night descended on Colville like a theater curtain, bringing with it a different kind of life. The saloon below their room grew raucous with music and laughter, the sound of men determined to forget the darkness of mine shafts and the weight of mountain isolation. Eleanor had slept fitfully during the afternoon, her body demanding rest despite her mind's resistance. Marcus remained vigilant, alternating between the window and door, a shadow within shadows. When McCready knocked shortly after 9, they were both ready, Eleanor in her simple dress with Catherine's coat over her shoulders, Marcus in his trail-worn clothes but freshly shaved, a concession to civilization that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Follow me, McCready said without preamble. Keep your heads down. Sullivan's men are drinking downstairs, but they're watching the stairs. He led them down a back staircase, through a narrow hallway cluttered with barrels and crates, and into a small room that might have once been a pantry. A single lamp burned low on a scarred table, illuminating the face of a man who rose as they entered. Blackwood, the man said, nodding once. Been a long time. Sheriff Hollister, Marcus replied, his tone neutral. Thought you'd have retired by now. Thought about it. Town had other ideas. Hollister was lean and weathered, with sharp eyes that had seen too much to be easily deceived. His badge gleamed dully in the lamplight. McCready says you're asking questions about Thomas Chase. Eleanor stepped forward. I'm his sister. He's been missing for 6 weeks, and I have reason to believe he's in danger. Hollister gestured for them to sit. I remember Chase, educated man, polite, asked a lot of questions about local history. Not the usual prospector type. Did he cause any trouble in town, Marcus asked. Not directly, no. But he stirred things up, especially after he started talking to old Jacob Whitley. Eleanor leaned forward. Who is Jacob Whitley? Was. Hollister corrected grimly. He died 3 days after your brother disappeared. Heart failure officially. But you don't believe that, Marcus guessed. Hollister's mouth tightened. Whitley was the oldest resident in Colville. Came here before the mines, before the war even. He knew these mountains better than anyone, including all the old stories. About the Confederate cash, Eleanor supplied. The sheriff shot her a sharp look, among other things. Whitley was a Union sympathizer during the war, claimed he helped hide deserters from both armies' mountains. If anyone knew where supplies might have been stashed, it would have been him, and my brother sought him out, Eleanor said. Almost daily for 2 weeks, Hollister confirmed. They'd sit on Whitley's porch for hours, talking, looking at papers. Then suddenly, Chase stops visits. 2 days later, he vanishes from McCready's. The day after that, Whitley's found dead in his bed. Convenient timing, Marcus observed. Very. Hollister lowered his voice further. Whitley's cabin was torn apart, someone searching for something. I found Chase's pocket watch under the bed, been keeping it safe, waiting to see if he'd return to claim it. He reached into his vest and withdrew a gold timepiece, passing it to Eleanor. She took it with trembling fingers, recognizing it immediately. This was our father's, she whispered. Thomas would never willingly part with it. Then I think we can assume his departure wasn't willing, Hollister said grimly. Have you confronted Sullivan? Marcus asked. Hollister gave a short, bitter laugh. With what? A missing drifter, an old man's natural death, and circumstantial timing? Sullivan owns the judge, half the town council, employs most of the able-bodied men here. I need more than suspicion to move against him. What about the cash itself? Eleanor pressed. If Thomas found it, if there are documents that could incriminate Sullivan, then finding it becomes even more urgent, Hollister finished. But the mountains are vast, and Sullivan's men have been searching for weeks. If Chase hid something, he hid it well. McCready, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. There might be a way to narrow it down. Chase left something in his room, didn't think much of it at the time, but maybe it's important. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Found this tucked between the mattress and headboard after he disappeared. It's a page torn from a journal dated 1865. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. The page contained a crude map showing a mountain range with an X marked near what appeared to be a lake, alongside a handwritten note, cache secured in cave beneath the Sentinel. The eagle watches from above. May God forgive what we've done. The Sentinel, Marcus, could be a rock formation. There are dozens in these mountains, Hollister pointed out, but combined with eagle and a lake ... Single quotes. Marcus studied the map more intently. This could be Eagle Point overlooking Widow's Lake. There's a distinctive rock spire there the locals call the Sentinel. That's 10 miles northeast of town, McCready said. Rough country, especially in winter, but not impossible, Marcus replied. And it would explain why Sullivan's men had been searching in that direction. Eleanor looked up from the map, determination hardening her features. We need to get there first. It's not that simple, Hollister cautioned. Sullivan's men patrol those mountains regularly now, and if your brother found something incriminating, they'll be watching for anyone following his trail. We don't have a choice, she insisted. Thomas could still be alive, and whatever he found might be the only leverage we have to secure his release. The men exchanged glances, acknowledging the truth in her words while recognizing the danger they presented. Dawn would be best, Marcus finally said. Most of Sullivan's men will be sleeping off tonight's whiskey. We can be halfway to Eagle Point before they realize we've gone. I can provide supplies, McCready offered. Food, ammunition, extra blankets, and I can create a distraction, Hollister added reluctantly. A dispute at the mine would draw attention away from the northern trails. Eleanor looked at each man in turn, gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, all of you. Hollister rose, adjusting his gun belt. Don't thank us yet, Mrs. Blackwood. We're still a long way from resolving this. He fixed Marcus with a penetrating stare. You understand what you're risking by crossing Sullivan again? He hasn't forgotten the last time. Neither have I, Marcus replied. Some debts need settling eventually. When Hollister and McCready had gone, Eleanor and Marcus returned to their room via the back stairs, avoiding the still crowded saloon. The noise below had grown louder, fueled by alcohol and the promise of payday. We should try to rest, Marcus said, checking the room carefully before closing the door. Tomorrow we'll demand everything we have. Eleanor nodded, but made no move toward the bed. Instead, she stood by the window, Thomas's pocket watch clutched in her hand, her face illuminated by the faint glow of street lamps below. He's alive, she said quietly. I can feel it. Thomas isn't just my brother, he's my twin. We've always sensed when the other was in danger. Marcus moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence without touching her. If he's alive, we'll find him, he promised. She turned to face him, their proximity suddenly intimate in the small room. Why are you doing this, Marcus? Really? This isn't your fight. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe I'm tired of avoiding fights that matter. Is that all? The question hung between them, demanding a truth he'd been reluctant to acknowledge even to himself. In the days since he'd found her half frozen in the snow, something had awakened in him, something he'd believed died alongside Catherine and Emma 15 years ago. No, he admitted softly. That's not all. Eleanor's eyes searched his face, finding whatever confirmation she sought there. Slowly, Deliberately, she reached up to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I thought I came west only for Thomas," she whispered. "Now I'm not so certain." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself to feel the simple warmth of human contact after so many years of isolation. When he opened them again, Eleanor stood even closer, her face upturned to his. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, tentative even, a question rather than a demand. Marcus answered by drawing her closer, one hand at the small of her back, the other cradling her head as if she were something infinitely precious and fragile. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I wasn't looking for this," she confessed. "For you, nor I for you," he replied. "Life has strange paths." She leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "If we find Thomas, if we survive Sullivan's men and whatever lies ahead, ... what then?" The question contained futures neither had dared contemplate until this moment. Marcus stroked her hair gently, allowing himself to imagine possibilities long abandoned. "Then we decide," he said simply. "Together." She nodded against his chest, content with an answer that offered no false promises, but acknowledged the bond forming between them. Outside, snow began to fall again, light flakes swirling in the glow of coal oil lamps. Tomorrow would bring danger, perhaps answers, possibly grief. But tonight, in this small room above a frontier saloon, two people who had known profound loss found something unexpected in each other, not a replacement for what had been taken, but a new beginning, tenuous yet real. As Eleanor finally slept, curled against him in the narrow bed, Marcus remained awake, planning their route to Eagle Point, considering contingencies, preparing for confrontation. But beneath these practical concerns ran a current of unfamiliar emotion. Hope, fragile but persistent, like the first green shoot after a devastating fire. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it differently than he had faced the last 15 years. Not alone, not empty, but with someone worth fighting for. Dawn broke with reluctant light, the sun struggling against heavy clouds that promised more snow before day's end. Marcus and Eleanor left Colville by the North Trail, their departure masked by Sheriff Hollister's manufactured disturbance at the mine, something about missing equipment and accusations of theft that drew Sullivan's men like moths to flame. They rode in silence, vigilant for pursuit, each absorbed in private thoughts about what awaited them at Eagle Point. The trail grew steeper as they climbed, their horses laboring through patches of deep snow. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge that offered a sweeping view of the valley below and the lake beyond, a frozen oval ringed by towering pines. "There," Marcus said, pointing to a distinctive spire of rock jutting from the mountainside above the lake. "The Sentinel." Eleanor studied it, comparing the formation to the crude map. "And the Eagle?" "Eagle Point is just above a cliff face that resembles a bird with outstretched wings." He adjusted his course. "The cache would be in a cave beneath the formation." The terrain grew treacherous as they approached, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through a narrow defile. Wind whistled between the rocks, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Eleanor's injured leg pained her, but she pressed on without complaint, her determination evident in every careful step. They reached the base of the Sentinel by early afternoon, massive pillar of striated rock that loomed above them like a silent guardian. Marcus secured their horses in a sheltered hollow, then helped Eleanor navigate the rocky slope leading toward the cliffs. "There should be a cave entrance," he said, scanning the rock face. The map wasn't specific about its location. They separated slightly, searching the uneven terrain for any opening. The wind had intensified, drowning out smaller sounds and making communication difficult. Marcus worked methodically, examining each shadow, each crevice, until, here, Eleanor's voice barely carried over the wind. She stood before what appeared to be a narrow fissure in the rock, partially concealed by an overhanging ledge. Marcus joined her quickly, examining the opening. "It's tight, but we should fit. Stay behind me." He drew his revolver before entering, wary of traps or wildlife that might have claimed the space. The fissure widened into a low tunnel that required them to crouch as they advanced. 20 feet in, the passage opened suddenly into a larger chamber where they could finally stand upright. "Wait," Marcus cautioned, striking a match. The small flame revealed a cave roughly 30 feet across, its walls glistening with moisture. At the far end stood a stack of wooden crates, their surfaces gray with dust and age. "The cache," Eleanor whispered. "Thomas found it." They approached cautiously. The crates bore faded stencils indicating Confederate Army supplies, ammunition, medical materials, preserved rations. But one smaller box, set apart from the others, drew their attention. Its lid had been pried open recently, the dust pattern disturbed. Marcus lifted the lid to reveal leather-bound ledgers and sealed document pouches. Eleanor reached for one, breaking the brittle seal to withdraw papers covered in faded script. "These are lists," she said, scanning the contents. "Names, dates, amounts, payments to Northern businessmen who secretly supported the Confederacy, suppliers who provided weapons while publicly supporting the Union." Her eyes widened. "There are dozens of prominent names here, including several who reinvented themselves after the war as patriotic industrialists." Marcus examined another document. "Military orders authorizing covert operations in Union territory, assassination plans for government officials." "This isn't just treasure, it's evidence of treason and war crimes." "In Sullivan's name?" Eleanor asked. "Here." Marcus pointed to a signature at the bottom of an order. Colonel Jerome Sutcliffe, authorizing the execution of civilian sympathizers in occupied territory. He looked up grimly. He changed his name after the war. But this is Sullivan. These documents could destroy everything he's built. A cold voice interrupted from the cave entrance, which is why they'll never leave this mountain. They turned sharply to find Jerome Sullivan himself standing in the passage, a revolver trained on them. Behind him loomed two armed men, including Halloran from the timber camp. Blackwood, Sullivan said with cold precision, you should have stayed in your mountain exile. And Mrs. Blackwood, or should I say Miss Chase? His smile never reached his eyes. Your resemblance to your brother is remarkable. Eleanor stepped forward. Where's Thomas? What have you done with him? Your brother proved surprisingly resilient during questioning. He refused to reveal the cache's location, even under persuasion. Sullivan's clinical tone made the implied torture more chilling. Eventually, I realized he must have left clues elsewhere, perhaps with his beloved twin sister. Is he alive? Eleanor demanded. Sullivan gestured to his men. Bring him. Halloran disappeared briefly, returning with a figure who stumbled between two additional guards. Thomas Chase was barely recognizable, gaunt, bruised, his once scholarly appearance reduced to that of a man who had endured weeks of systematic cruelty. Eleanor? His voice cracked with disbelief. How touching, Sullivan interrupted. Family reunited at last. Unfortunately, none of you will be leaving this cave. He nodded to his men. Secure them. Once we've removed the documents, this entrance will be permanently sealed. Marcus shifted slightly, positioning himself between Sullivan and Eleanor. These mountains have claimed enough innocent lives, Sullivan. Let them go. Your quarrels with me, my quarrel, Sullivan replied coldly, is with anyone who threatens what I've built. War is over. These documents are meaningless except as tools for blackmail or revenge. They're evidence of your crimes, Eleanor countered. Crimes you've never answered for. Sullivan's expression hardened. The past is dead, Miss Chase, as you will be, unless you cooperate fully. Now where are the rest of the documents? Your brother removed something from the cache before we apprehended it. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged confused glances. There's nothing missing, Marcus said. Everything's here. Don't play games with me, Blackwood, Sullivan snapped. Chase took something specific, a sealed packet marked with the Treasury Department seal. Where is it? The answer came from Thomas, his voice weak but determined. Someplace you'll never find it. Insurance in case anything happened to me. Sullivan backhanded him viciously. Your insurance has failed. Your sister is here. Your rescuer is here. And no one knows where to look for any of you. That's where you're wrong, came a new voice from the passage. Sheriff Hollister stood with his revolver drawn, McCready beside him holding a shotgun. Step away from them, Sullivan. Sullivan's momentary surprise gave Marcus the opening he needed. He lunged forward, knocking Sullivan's gun aside as it discharged harmlessly into the cave floor. The chamber erupted into chaos, Sullivan's men drawing weapons, Hollister and McCready firing from the entrance, Eleanor pulling her brother to safety behind the crates. Marcus grappled with Sullivan, driving him back against the cave wall. The older man fought with desperate strength, eyes wild with the knowledge that his carefully constructed life was unraveling. You should have killed me years ago, Marcus growled, pinning Sullivan's gun hand. When you burned my family's farm, when you threatened my land, you've left too many survivors in your wake. The strong survive, Sullivan spat. The weak perish. That's the only law that matters. No, Marcus replied. There's another law, the reckoning that comes for men like you sooner or later. A shot rang out from across the cave. Sullivan jerked in Marcus's grip, eyes widening in shock as blood bloomed across his chest. Behind them, Thomas Chase stood with Eleanor's derringer in his trembling hand. For Jacob Whitley, Thomas said softly, and all the others. Sullivan slid to the ground, his life fading even as his men surrendered to Hollister's superior position. The fight, so chaotic moments before, ended with unnerving suddenness. In the aftermath, as Hollister secured the prisoners and McCready tended to Thomas's injury, Eleanor found Marcus standing alone by the cave entrance, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. Are you all right? She asked gently, moving to his side. He turned to her, his expression complex, relief, exhaustion, and something like peace mingling in his weathered features. I've carried their ghosts for 15 years, he said quietly. Catherine and Emma believed I could have saved them if I'd made different choices. And now I understand that some burdens can be set down without forgetting those we've lost. He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. They wouldn't have wanted me to stop living when they died. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, watching as the clouds broke momentarily, allowing a shaft of sunlight to illuminate the valley below. What happens next? She asked. Hollister will take Sullivan's men back to face charges. The documents will ensure justice. Finally, he glanced back into the cave where Thomas sat wrapped in blankets. Your brother needs time to heal, as do you, and us, she prompted softly. Marcus turned fully toward her, his hands framing her face with unexpected tenderness. I've spent 15 years alone on that mountain. Thought it was where I belonged, the only place I could bear to exist. His voice roughened with emotion. Then you arrived half frozen on my land and everything changed. For me as well, she whispered. I came west seeking only my brother, never imagining I would find ... a future, he suggested when she faltered. Yes. Her eyes searched his. Is that what you're offering, Marcus Blackwood? A future? Instead of answering with words, he drew her closer, his kiss more certain now. a promise rather than a question. When they parted, snow had begun to fall again, gentle flakes settling on their shoulders like a blessing. "My cabin is remote," he said. "The winters are harsh. But with a proper doctor's visit for Thomas, supplies from town, perhaps some books for you both, ... Single quote, she smiled, understanding his roundabout proposal. "It sounds perfect. A place to heal. To begin again." From inside the cave, Thomas called Eleanor's name. As she turned to go to him, Marcus caught her hand once more. "I never believed I'd find warmth again," he said simply. "Thank you for proving me wrong." Eleanor's eyes softened. "Sometimes getting lost in a storm is the only way to find your way home." Single quotes. Together they walked back into the cave, where Thomas waited with the recovered documents that would bring long-delayed justice, and the future waited beyond a mountain cabin no longer defined by absence but by the presence of newfound love and second chances.